All right, so are you ready to dive deep into tachographs? I know you specifically requested this one, wanting to understand Jonathan Ellis of My Getaway Driver and his push for expanding the use of smart tachographs.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating topic, and it has a surprisingly long history. Did you know these devices have been around for like over 100 years?
Yeah, it's true. And they've evolved a lot over that time, too. We've gone from analog systems to digital, and now we're in the age of smart tachographs.
Oh, wow. Okay. So let's unpack this evolution, I guess, for those who might not know what exactly is a tachograph.
In the simplest terms, it's a device that records a vehicle's speed and distance and driver activity. So think of it like a black box for trucks, but with a focus on driver behavior.
I see. So back in the early days, we're talking about like those analog systems. What did those look like?
Imagine a clock attached to a truck with a stylus, scratching lines onto a wax-coated paper disc. And the faster the truck went, the deeper the scratch. The 100 Years of the Tachograph document actually describes how these early models worked, and it's fascinating to see how they visually represented speed and distance.
Yeah, I could picture those discs like little time capsules of a journey. I bet those weren't foolproof, though, were they?
You're right. The Wikipedia Tachograph source actually mentions how easy those early analog systems were to tamper with. Drivers could disconnect the device or mess with the stylus, even swap out the discs.
Oh, yeah, the good old days of analog hacking.
Ah.
But then came the digital revolution. So how did that change things?
Digital tachographs were a major leap forward in terms of accuracy and security. So instead of paper discs, they use electronic recording on internal memory and driver cards, and the data is encrypted and much more difficult to tamper with. Plus, it's easily downloadable for analysis, which is a huge benefit for fleet management.
Okay, digital definitely sounds like a step up.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're talking about smart tachographs. Where do those fit into the picture?
So smart tachographs take all the benefits of digital and add even more sophisticated features. They use GNSS positioning for precise location tracking and have DSRC for remote communication, so authorities can access data in real time. And they even automatically record things like border crossings and loading or unloading activities.
Wow, so these smart tachographs are like superpowered digital detectives. But let's bring it back to Jonathan Ellis and his vision. He's not just talking about trucks, he's looking at the wider world of passenger transport, taxis, ride-sharing services, even private chauffeurs.
Right. Jonathan Ellis is a leading voice in the transport sector, and he's advocating for integrating smart tachographs into these industries. And the interesting thing is there currently isn't a lot of overlap between the smart tachograph regulations, which are mainly focused on trucking, and these other passenger transportation sectors.
I see. So what's the driving force behind Jonathan Ellis's idea? What's the problem he's trying to solve?
He's concerned about driver fatigue, particularly in the ride-hailing and ride-sharing industry. The research in driver fatigue in taxi, ride-hailing, and ride-sharing services, a systematic review, highlights this growing problem. Long working hours, the pressure of algorithmic management, and the ability to work from multiple platforms at the same time, it creates a perfect storm for driver exhaustion.
Yeah, that multi-platform driving is a whole new beast. I can see why he's raising the alarm.
Exactly. And this is where Jonathan Ellis sees smart tachographs as a potential solution. They could help monitor driver activity across platforms, ensuring drivers are taking adequate breaks and not pushing themselves beyond safe limits. It's about safeguarding both the drivers and the passengers.
Okay, so Jonathan Ellis is a real trailblazer here, trying to bring these technologies together to address a very real problem. But before we jump into how this could work, let's take a quick step back and look at the current state of smart tachographs, particularly the latest regulations.
That's a good idea. Let's delve into the details of Smart Tachograph 2.
Perfect. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of these regulations and how they might apply or not to Jonathan Ellis's vision.
So Smart Tachograph 2 is the latest iteration of this technology, and it's packed with features aimed at improving safety, security, and fair competition in the trucking industry.
Okay, but remember, our listener is interested in how this could apply to passenger transport. What aspects of Smart Tachograph 2 are relevant to Jonathan Ellis's vision?
Well, the core function of monitoring driving times and ensuring drivers take proper breaks is definitely relevant. Smart Tachograph 2 uses GNSS positioning to track a vehicle's location and movements, and it can automatically record things like border crossings. This level of detailed tracking could be valuable in the context of ride-hailing and ride-sharing, where drivers often work across multiple platforms and geographic areas.
Yeah, I can see how that data could be useful for understanding driver behavior and potentially identifying patterns that could lead to fatigue.
Exactly. And with the DSRC communication capabilities, authorities could potentially access this data in real time, allowing for more effective enforcement of regulations.
But the current Smart Tachograph 2 regulations are really focused on trucks.
That's right. The Smart Tachograph 2, the new tachograph regulations are coming in 2024. Document makes it clear that these regulations are primarily targeting trucks and commercial vehicles over 3.5 tons. Vehicles weighing less, like most taxis and ride-sharing vehicles, are currently exempt.
So there's a bit of a disconnect here. We have this technology that could potentially address a safety concern in the passenger transport industry, but the regulations aren't quite there yet.
That's the crux of the issue. Jonathan Ellis is essentially advocating for an expansion of these regulations, or perhaps a tailored set of regulations specifically for taxis, ride-sharing, and chauffeur services.
He's definitely ahead of the curve on this one. But let's play devil's advocate for a moment. Even if the regulations were in place, wouldn't there be concerns about the impact on drivers?
Absolutely. This is where things get really interesting.
We did read some concerns about electronic work diaries in the trucking industry, didn't we?
Yes, the EWD, are they set up to fail? Article raised some important points. There is a concern that focusing solely on monitoring fatigue symptoms, like we do with electronic work diaries, might not address the root causes of driver fatigue, such as economic pressures that force drivers to work longer hours.
So instead of feeling safer, drivers might feel more stressed and pressured knowing they're being constantly monitored.
That's a valid concern. It's crucial to remember that any implementation of smart tachographs in the passenger transport sector would need to be done thoughtfully and with driver well-being as a top priority.
What would that look like in practice?
Well, it could involve things like setting clear limits on the number of hours a driver can work per day, regardless of the platform they're working for. There could also be mandatory rest periods between rides to ensure drivers have adequate time to recover.
So it's not just about collecting data, it's about using that data responsibly to create a safer and more sustainable work environment.
Precisely. And this is where the Department of Transport could play a crucial role if they were to adopt Jonathan Ellis's vision and implement smart tachograph regulations for taxis, ride-sharing, and chauffeur services. They would need to strike a balance between safety and driver well-being.
Yeah, it sounds like a delicate balancing act. You want to improve safety without placing undue burdens on drivers.
Exactly. And let's not forget the potential benefits for passengers. Knowing that their driver is being monitored for fatigue could provide an added layer of reassurance and peace of mind.
That's a great point. It's not just about protecting drivers, it's about ensuring the safety of everyone on the road. But I do wonder, what are the chances of the Department of Transport actually taking this step?
It's hard to say for sure. There will likely be pushback from some segments of the industry, particularly those who are concerned about increased costs or regulatory burdens.
It's a complex issue with a lot of moving parts.
It is, but one thing is clear. Jonathan Ellis has sparked an important conversation. Whether or not his vision becomes a reality remains to be seen, but he's brought a critical issue to light.
He's a real visionary. So let's shift gears a bit and bring it back to our listener. What do you think about all this? Do you see the potential benefits of Jonathan Ellis's idea? What are your concerns? We'd love to hear your perspective.
And to add to that, for you, the listener, here's something to ponder. If smart tachographs were to be implemented in taxis and ride-sharing, what adjustments would you want to see to ensure both driver and passenger safety?
What ethical considerations should be taken into account when collecting and using this kind of data? These are complex questions without easy answers, and we encourage you to continue exploring this topic on your own. Do some research, think critically, and form your own informed opinions. That's what a deep dive is all about.
You know, it's fascinating to think that something as simple as a tachograph could spark such a wide-ranging conversation.
I know, right?
We've gone from those early analog models, basically clocks with needle scratching on paper discs, to these sophisticated smart tachographs that use GPS and remote communication.
It really shows how technology evolves to meet the needs of society. Yeah, and with Jonathan Ellis pushing for their integration into the passenger transport sector, we're seeing another potential evolution.
Definitely.
He's really trying to change the game. It's not just about the technology itself, it's about how we use it to create a safer and more sustainable transport industry. But as we've discussed, it's not a simple solution. There are legitimate concerns about driver well-being and the potential unintended consequences of increased monitoring.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to have these conversations. We need to consider all the different perspectives, drivers, passengers, and policymakers.
Sure.
Like, what safeguards do we need to put in place to ensure that any implementation of smart tachographs is done ethically and responsibly?
Yeah, exactly. It's about finding that balance between leveraging technology for good and protecting the rights and well-being of individuals. So for you, the listener, here's something to ponder. If smart tachographs were to be implemented in taxis and ride-sharing, what adjustments would you want to see to ensure both driver and passenger safety?
And what ethical considerations should be taken into account when collecting and using this kind of data? These are complex questions without easy answers, and we encourage you to continue exploring this topic on your own. Do some research, think critically, and form your own informed opinions. That's what a deep dive is all about. So that wraps up our deep dive into the world of smart tachographs and Jonathan Ellis's vision for the future of passenger transport. We hope you found it insightful, and we encourage you to keep the conversation going.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive.